Hi guys, it's Scott again here on Keisha's channel. Wanted to talk about a few more car things. Some people have asked some questions, so I'll go ahead and answer some of those questions directly and then kind of expand on a few of the subjects. The first thing I wanted to talk about, some people asked, hey, if I co-sign for someone, does it affect my credit? The answer there directly is yes, it does. And it affects your credit in a lot of ways. A few years ago, when they passed the Dodd-Frank Act, it changed some of the rules as far as how banks look at things. And when banks look at loaning money now, there's really no such thing as a signer co-signer anymore. They consider both to be joint applicants, even though one may be stronger or the deal may be approved on the strength of one applicant, whereas, say, for example, maybe a parent's co-signing for a child and the child has no credit, maybe he's 18, college student has no credit at all, and the parents are trying to get him a loan but want to help establish some credit. Now, if you're going to be the one making the payment and you want to help establish credit for your child, that's a great thing to do, and that's a great way to help build credit. But keep in mind, if you're co-signing for a child who's say a non-resident child, or you're not going to be making the payments, you're relying on that child to make the payment, keep in mind if they don't make the payments, you're responsible to do so. So when I'm asked, does it affect my credit? Yes, it does. It's going to affect your credit both positively and negatively, depending on the outcome of how the payments are made. In addition to affecting your credit, it's also going to affect your credit rating, meaning that it's going to increase your debt load. So initially, it may actually lower your credit score. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, also keep in mind that as you, let's say, for example, you co-sign for someone to buy a car. Maybe it's a brother, cousin, someone like that, nephew, sister, and you say, yes, I'll co-sign. Well, you co-sign for them, and then 6 months later, you want to buy a car, and your debt to income may be not in the position that you can do that. So if you're going to co-sign, make sure that you're prepared for what happens in the future. Make sure you're prepared that, hey, listen, I'm not going to buy a car in the next 12 months or so that way you've had a chance for those payments to establish history, and hopefully a good history, to establish a history so that way you too can buy a car. Because if you put yourself in a position where you co-sign for someone, and the time period elapses, a short time period, and then you need to buy a car, then you may need someone to sign with you just to justify a second automobile, okay? Because the banks also, when they're looking at it, they're looking at how many open autos as well as you have. And generally speaking, they're going to say they want one butt for one car, unless your credit is exceptional and or your income exceeds what their norms are. And when I say that, most of the time they're looking at a justification where the combined total of car payments is not going to exceed 18% of your income. Okay? So that answers question one, at least I hope so. But keep in mind, folks, co-signing is a serious thing. You're assuming the obligation for the full debt if the other party doesn't pay. So keep in mind, it can be a great thing to help establish someone credit, but can also be a bad thing if they don't make the payments, because if they don't make the payments, the bank is going to expect you to. Okay? Now, the next question someone asked was, hey, should I lease or should I buy? Well, guys, that's a personal preference, and it really all depends on exactly what you're going to be doing with the automobile. There are advantages to both. In certain states, they call it leasing. In other states, they may even call it balloon payments. In some states, they actually have both. Ultimately, a balloon payment, the difference depending on your state, a balloon payment is basically the same concept as a lease with a residual or a guaranteed in value. The difference being in a balloon payment and a lease, when your obligation is up, you have the option to turn the vehicle in, buy the vehicle, or walk away. With a balloon payment, when the term is up, when the initial term is up, then you have the obligation to pay off the balance of that vehicle. A balloon payment is essentially the same thing as a lease. What that means is it's going to have an in value, or in other words, a balance of the vehicle that's not paid for. So let's say, for example, that you want to buy, a new Honda Civic, and they announce, the ad says it's a $199 payment with a balloon at the end. Well, that $199 payment, depending on the state you're in, they may have to guarantee that same payment for the balance of the loan, regardless of how long that term has to be. So what I mean by that is, let's say that perhaps you do a 36-month lease, or a 36-month balloon payment, and then you still owe $14,000 at the end of that 36 months. Well, in certain states, South Carolina, where we live, being one of them, if you do a balloon payment, the manufacturer that sponsors that rate and/or the bank that assumes that loan, doing the balloon loan, in most cases in our state, it's only done by manufacturers. That's why I said that. But that manufacturer will then have to guarantee that payment until the balance is paid in full. So in other words, if you had a $199 payment for the first 36 months and still owed $14,000, you're going to continue to have a $199 payment until that car is paid for. Now, guys, that might be another 72 months. It might be another 84 months. So in a sense, what ends up happening on a balloon note, unless you plan on paying the vehicle off and or refinancing it on a balloon note, you might actually be borrowing or having a car payment for a period of 84 to 108 months on the same automobile. So if you do a balloon, make sure you thoroughly look into it and or you're certain that you're going to keep the car. As far as leasing, basically, guys, is the same thing as if the easy way I know how to explain it, leasing is just like renting an apartment. You're paying upfront for what you're using. Now, leases can be set up a multitude of ways depending on the number of miles you drive. It can be set up anywhere from 8 to 25,000 miles depending on the manufacturer. Generally speaking, most leases are done on either 10, 12, or 15,000 miles per year, and the manufacturer guarantees the end value of the car. Now, in days gone by, that people used to be afraid of leases because leases had open-ended values. In other words, Ford was the biggest culprit in that. They had something called a red carpet lease, and their red carpet lease, what that did was had a market value attached to the end of the lease, and whatever the market value happened to be, you had to pay the difference in what the amount that you borrowed, the amount that you had yet to pay as far as your residual and the market value of the car. So let's say, for example, you set the residual or the end value of the car at $10,000 on a $20,000 car, so you paid $10,000 over 36 months, where you thought you would have a $10,000 balance. If the market went bad and the car's only worth $6,000, you'd have to write a check for the additional $4,000. That doesn't exist anymore. What they have now are what are called closed-end commercial leases, which mean that they are guaranteed in values, and that won't change. So in other words, the day that you sign the lease, you know what the value of the vehicle is going to be, guaranteed to you, the buyer, at the term of the lease. And what that means for you is that you know, say for example, you're buying, I don't know, we'll call it a Volkswagen Passat on a 36-month lease. You may have a $12,000 residual. And so you know in three years, if you choose to buy that car, you can buy it for $12,000. Now the nice thing about a closed-end commercial lease is when it's over, you can turn in the keys and walk away, keeping in mind you're still restricted to those mileage parameters, as well as you have to maintain the car up to vehicle standards. In other words, you can't turn it in with dents and dings and bald tires and check engine lights and things like that. It has to be in good working order, and or they will charge you for it after the fact. Now, one advantage to leasing in certain states is if you lease in a business name, you can write off the full lease payment. Of course, I don't want to give you tax advice and all those things, so talk to your accountant about that. But leasing is just an alternative form of buying. Balloon payment, alternative form of buying. Just depends on what your particular needs are. If you have more specific questions as far as that's concerned, I'll be happy to address them. But guys, keep in mind, leasing, as I said, it's kind of like renting an apartment. You're just paying up front for what you're using, and at the end of it, you walk away. That's the idea behind it. Now, if you have a trade-in, that was the next thing. Hey, if I have a trade-in, can I still lease or should I buy? Depends on your position in your trade. If you have negative equity, meaning that you owe more than what your trade is involved, and you want to lease, you can still do that, keeping in mind that whatever that negative equity amount is will have to be absorbed in the term of the lease. So what I mean by that is let's say that you do a 3-year lease, and you have $3,000 negative equity. Well, that breaks down to $1,000 a year that will have to be added to your payment. So you just figure that out, and you can figure that your car payment is going to be $80 or $90 more a month based on the negative equity that has to be absorbed before that vehicle is eligible to be turned back in. Very simple stuff. It's all math. Never did believe my calculus teacher when he said I'd use it every day for a living, but I believe him now. The last thing I'm going to touch on is people talk about trade-ins. Hey, should I sell it myself or should I trade it in? Listen, guys, that's kind of a trade-off depending on what you are willing to invest or what your potential gain can be. Generally speaking, the difference between the trade-in value and the retail value of a car is about 10% of the value of the vehicle. Okay, 10%. That now, if you're dealing with a car that's worth $3,000, that's $300. I'm going to tell you that's not worth my time. I'm going to trade that vehicle in. A couple of things there, depending on what your state is and where you are, you may or may not receive a tax credit for the full amount that you trade in a vehicle. So if you have a newer vehicle and say it's worth $10,000 and you're in a state where they charge 6% sales tax, you've effectively gained $600 in tax credit for that. So now your trade-in is worth $10,600, if that makes sense. Guys, keeping in mind, if you don't own your trade outright and you're trying to sell it, most people are not going to be willing to do business with you until you can guarantee title. And what I mean by that is they're going to want to go to the bank with you and pay the bank and make sure that they're going to receive the title before you get it. Okay? Doesn't mean you can't do it, just means it's a little bit more difficult. Depending on your state, depending on your position, depending on what you want to do, it may benefit you to trade the vehicle in. As far as if you want to sell your car yourself, there's some assumed risks involved in doing that. As a dealer, we understand what those risks are, but you as an individual may not. Some of the things that you're going to have to deal with are people, strange people getting your phone number, calling you or contacting you, people who you don't know driving your vehicle. So make sure that you're fully insured if you're going to do that. Make sure also that they carry automobile insurance. Make sure that you do your homework before that person shows up. If you're a female, make sure that you've got someone with you, that you're not going there alone. Always meet in a public place and limit the amount of time that they're allowed to drive your vehicle. They may also want to take your vehicle to their mechanic and have their mechanic look at it. There's a lot of things that happen there, guys, that get out of your control rather quickly. The advantage, those are the disadvantages, I say. The advantage is, generally speaking, when you sell your car yourself, you can get more money for it. But you also keep in mind, guys, very much like going into a dealership, you never pay full sticker price for a vehicle. No one's going to pay what you ask when you're trying to sell your vehicle. So you want to do your homework and make sure that you price it accordingly, make sure that it's within market, and that's an easy thing to do. You can check Kelley Blue Book, you can check NADA.com, you can also check Edmunds.com if it's a newer vehicle. All those will give you book values or kind of a good idea. On Kelley Blue Book, they have a couple of different tabs that you can check. One of those is private party value, and generally speaking, private party is going to be a little bit below retail, a little bit above trade-in, and that's kind of the niche market for consumers who are trying to sell the vehicle themselves. Keeping in mind, guys, you might not sell it in a couple of days, you might not sell it in a couple of weeks. So again, that's an assumed risk that you're going to have to take if you decide to sell the vehicle yourself. Generally speaking, you can make a little bit more money. It's just a question how much time is involved and how much effort is involved on your part. Anyway, I hope that all those things help. If you guys have any more questions, just make sure and get them to Keisha. I'll try to address them as I can. Wish you guys a good night, and y'all take care. Thanks.